I don't know if you, hopefully this makes sense to you. If you've ever seen the movie Sixth Sense, you're going to know what I'm talking about. If you've never seen the movie, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you a little secret in it, but it won't ruin it for you. You can go back and watch it. You remember the first time you watched the movie Sixth Sense, the first time that you sat down and you're like, okay, this sounds like a good movie. Somebody said it's cool. I'm going to watch it, and you're watching it, and you're watching the storyline unfold in front of you, and you kind of get it. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, this kid sees dead people. Okay, I get it. And you're just kind of following along the story, and then there's this moment at the end when all of a sudden you go, oh, he's always been dead, right? That moment, that aha moment that you go, oh, this story is totally different than what I thought it was. Like, you can get the storyline, you get it, but this is a moment when you just went, oh, okay, this is a cool story. This is amazing. That is the story of the Old Testament. And then Jesus. We see the same thing happen. We read the stories in the Old Testament, read the stories about Moses and Abraham and Joseph and David and Goliath, and we see Daniel and the lion's den and Jonah and the whale. We see all these amazing stories in the Old Testament, and we get it. We read the stories and we're like, okay, I can get something out of that. I understand something. There's something that I can apply. But then when you meet Jesus, and you get to the New Testament and you see what Jesus does on the cross and you see the different things that Jesus does in his life, there's almost always this moment when you start to put it together, you're like, oh, that's what that was about. That is the Old Testament. And we've been unpacking different stories in the Old Testament over the last few weeks. The gospel that we see before Christ, before he comes on the scene, there is so many hints of the gospel. This morning, we're going to jump into a story, and we're going to cut off a big chunk of Genesis. We're going to go through a lot of parts of the book of Genesis and look at the story of Joseph. And if you have your Bibles, I'd like you to turn to Genesis chapter 37. We're going to jump into it in a minute. But one of the things that happens as we're looking at these stories, when you just look at a story in the Old Testament, again, you get it. But then when you compare it to the story of Jesus and you start to see these links, to see these gospel arcs from Old Testament to New Testament, you begin to learn some things. You begin to see that we all needed Jesus to come. We all needed Jesus to show up. Every story in the Old Testament points to our need for Jesus. We needed Jesus to come and we needed him to live a life that we could never live. We needed him to live a perfect life. We could never do it. We're a mess. We make mistakes like David. We make mistakes like Moses. We sometimes question our faith like Abraham. We wrestle with whether we should eat the fruit or not like Adam and Eve. And over, we realized that we needed Jesus to come to live a life we could never live and to die a death that you and I deserve to die so we could have eternity with God that only he deserved to have. That is an amazing story. And when we look at the story of Joseph, I don't know that there's a better story in the Old Testament that points to Jesus than the story of Joseph. So Genesis chapter 37, we're going to jump right in. And let me kind of tell you, the story of Joseph is riddled with all of these impressions, all of these foreshadowings of Jesus. Now, let me kind of get on the surface of this. First of all, we're going to look at Joseph, and the first time we meet him, he's about 17 years old. And every indication about Joseph, and we're going to speed through his life, but there's all these moments when we see Jesus, but let me be careful with this. He's not a type of Jesus in the Old Testament. In fact, when we meet him, he's kind of a punk. He's kind of I don't know how else to say it. It says that the first time we begin hearing about him, it says that he gave his dad a bad report about his brothers. He's the youngest brother at the time. He's got older brothers. And he starts tattling on them. And on the surface, we look at it and go, man, what a punk. Like, why is he ratting on his brothers? But if we take another angle on it, we see that Joseph has this very strong sense of justice. He wants things to be right. He wants people to do things the right way. And if you are like me and you really have this strong sense of justice, it can drive you crazy when people seem to be getting away with things that they should get in trouble for. I had no problem telling on my brothers all the time. And yet, we also know that when you stand up, especially in our culture today, when you stand up for what's right, you're going to get pushback. You're going to feel alienated from people. People are going to stop wanting to talk to you, to be around you because of that strong sense of justice. And so there's an element of Joseph that, yeah, he's kind of a punk kid, but also he's got this strong sense of justice that he wants what's right. And so let's look at what happens with Joseph. Genesis chapter 37. We're going to begin in verse 3. We're going to see how this story unfolds, okay? Starting verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. Okay, I want to stop there for a second, and I want us to kind of catch some more of the story. We see a really weird thing happen right here. We see the word Israel show up. Now, got to go a little bit backstory. Jacob is Joseph's father, and Jacob has this conversation with God, and God changes Jacob's name to Israel. But all throughout the story, we're going to see it kind of flip back and forth. This is the very first hint. I don't know if we catch this, but this is one of the first hints we get to Jesus. It's interesting. Jesus is born in Israel, and Joseph is born in Israel, Jacob. We don't oftentimes catch that, but it's these little subtle hints that we're going to kind of dig into. It says that he was born to Jacob, and he was more loved than his other sons. Okay, parents, bad idea. You shouldn't love one of your kids more than another, right? That's strike one. We should, and honestly, there's some times when we have certain favorites and other ones that drive us a little more crazy than another one. We get that. But it's even worse when your kids know that kid is your favorite. Jacob is setting Joseph up for failure already. And to add to that, he gives him this coat, he gives him this jacket, he gives him this gift. The robe was meant to be a public proclamation of Jacob's his love for his son, especially this one. It doesn't say that he gives any other sons it, he just gives it to Joseph. Again, we get another hint. We get a hint that, remember that time when Jesus is baptized, and when he comes up out of the water, it says that there's an audible voice that God says, "This is my son in whom I'm pleased." This is my son. It's a public proclamation of who Jesus is. Jacob is doing some of the same thing with Joseph. Let's keep going, verse 4. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Okay, let me tie in another gospel moment, another Jesus moment. Fast forward to Jesus. Jesus is born in Israel, right? The leaders of Israel, the brothers, the sons of Israel, all the leaders of Israel, how did they treat Jesus? They hated him. They couldn't speak kindly about him. You start seeing these hints? Let's keep going. It says there that when his brothers saw the love of him, they couldn't speak highly of him. Let me kind of sum up some more of the story. What follows is Joseph begins having these dreams. And in the dreams, it has different things, different items bowing down before him. And so what he does, he goes and tells his brothers, "Hey, I've had this dream, and there's going to be a day when you're all going to bow down before me." That's not like what a punk, right? If I'm the older brother, if I'm one of the older brothers, we'll see about bowing. Let me show you bow. You know, we're gonna handle this, right? But Joseph doesn't just end there. He even tells his father that someday his father's going to bow down before him. Now, that doesn't sound great. And we're like, well, how does that connect to Jesus? Do you remember this part where Jesus says that at some point every knee will bow and every tongue confess who their Lord is? We are starting to see some hints in the life of Joseph. This whole situation does not go well. In fact, it stirs up more anger with the brothers. Jump down to verse 18. Let me show you some more. So what Jacob does is he sends the sons out. He sends them out with the sheep. And oftentimes they would have to go find food and water for the sheep. And they could travel as many as 4, 5, 6 days away from home, finding food and just being out in the wilderness. And then they would kind of circle their way back. They'd work their way around a certain area. And so Jacob, he hasn't heard from the sons for a few days. So he says, hey, Joseph. Joseph is the only one left behind. Probably the brothers are happy that he's not around, a little punk. And so, but Jacob goes, hey, Joseph, I need you to go check in on your brothers. And maybe tattle on them. I don't know. Maybe just tell me how they're doing. Are they all okay? Is everything good? Everything fine? And so he sends Joseph off. And Joseph, it takes him 2 or 3 days before he gets word of where they might be. And then all of a sudden, he finds out where they are, and he starts coming. And his brothers are in this field, and they see this image coming towards him, and they know who it is. Look at this, down to verse 18. And they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. I want you to keep noticing the hints to Jesus as we talk about Joseph. Are there any other people in the life of Jesus that plotted to kill Jesus? Let me keep going. They said to one another, oh, look, here comes that dream expert. So now, come on, let's kill him. I mean, that just seems extreme. But they said, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. And when Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. Thank you, Reuben. Wait, there's more. He said, let's not take his life. Reuben also said to them, don't shed blood. Throw him into the pit in the wilderness and don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from them. Oh, that sounds good, but it's not. And return him to his father. Reuben, all he wanted the recognition. He's plotting in his head what he's going to do, right? It's at least 2 or 3 days that Joseph has traveled. And he goes and he sees his brothers, and they see him, and they decide to plot to kill him, just like there were people in Israel who were plotting to kill Jesus. And it says that they came up with this excuse that we'll just tell Dad that an animal devoured him. Skipping back to Jesus, during the time of Jesus, the Jewish people thought of the Roman government and the Roman leadership and the soldiers as like wild animals who would take any chance they could to devour a Jew. So here's the story of Joseph. We're already seeing these hints towards Jesus. But Reuben says, hey, let's spare his life because he's got another plan. He wants to be Dad's favorite. He's going to come back a little later and save Joseph. Well, somewhere between that moment and the next moment that we're going to read, Reuben, maybe 1 or 2 of the other brothers have decided that maybe they're the scouts and they've got to go on ahead and see if there's food and water up ahead. And so they're somehow not part of the conversation. Jump down to verse 26 and look what happens. Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. That's interesting. And not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. So, here we've got Judah. Judah says, hey, wait a minute. Instead of killing him, why don't we just sell him? Why don't we sell him to the Ishmaelites? Let me see. Where's the connection with the Ishmaelites? Do we know who the father of the Ishmaelites are? Oh, that's Ishmael, Abraham's abandoned and kicked out son. There's a conflict between the Ishmaelites and the Jews, the sons of Isaac, right? There's already this built-in tension. He's going to sell him to the enemy. Who else was sold to the enemy for some silver? It says that they sell Joseph off for 20 pieces of silver. In this time, 20 pieces of silver was the going rate, the minimum standard of payment for a young slave. So they're going to take the minimum that a young slave would be worth, 20 pieces of silver. I know that somehow doesn't connect with Jesus a little bit when we realize that Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. But did you know that 30 pieces of silver represented the minimum amount that would be paid for a slave that was dead? And Jesus is sold as a dead slave. Judah. I thought this was really interesting. Do you know that Judah's name translated into the Greek is the word Judas? All of a sudden, we're starting to see some big links between Joseph and Jesus. Joseph is handed over to the Ishmaelites, and he gets into this house. He gets sold off to a guy by the name of Potiphar, and things begin to change. Things begin to look up for Joseph. Jump over to chapter 39, okay? It says, now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards, bought him from the Ishmaelites, and brought him, who had brought him there. Verse 2, sorry. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord had made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. And from the time that he put him in charge of the household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned and in his house and in his fields. Joseph is finding out to be a very trustworthy slave. Everything he does just seems to turn to gold. Everything he does seems to bless. Everything he does seems to just make things better. He's doing things that nobody can understand, but it's obvious that his God is with him. We know the rest of the story. If you remember part of the story, as Joseph is building this relationship, this trust with Potiphar, Potiphar's wife has another plan. She wants to sleep with Joseph. And so there's a couple times she makes advances at Joseph. She tries to get him to sleep with her. And he says no, and he leaves every time, and he gets out of there every time, and he rejects her every time. And then finally she's had enough. And the last time she offers to sleep with him, he begins to run away, and she grabs his cloak, she grabs the jacket or whatever he has on, and he gets out of the room and he takes off. And she screams out, and he claims that he tried to abuse her. Look, I've got his cloak. And so he's thrown into prison. He's innocent, but he's thrown into prison. I think there's an interesting part here that sometimes we don't catch on to. He goes into this prison, and he starts to, the head, the leader, the main commander over the prison starts to notice something about Joseph, that everything he does just goes well. And so he puts Joseph into this position of leadership. And he starts having him do different things to help prisoners earn their freedom. And all of a sudden, we can start seeing a connection between Joseph and Jesus, because Jesus said he came to set prisoners free. Joseph is thriving in the midst of suffering. And then there's this interesting moment that happens. Jump over to chapter 40. This is cool. Stay with me. You're going to see some things that are just going to blow your mind. Get ready. Here we go. Chapter 40, verse 1. And after this, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker, we're going to talk about them in a second, offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with the two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guards in the prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. So here's these two people, a cupbearer and a baker. Their job is to make sure the food and the wine that is given to the king or to the Pharaoh is not poisoned, is not going to kill him, is not going to make him sick. We don't know what happened, but somewhere along the way, the cupbearer and the baker are both accused of something, or maybe they did something wrong. They made the Pharaoh angry. Pharaoh sends them into prison. Let's stop for a second. What does a baker bake? Bread. What does a cupbearer usually have in a cup? Wine. It's not ironic that it's a cupbearer and a baker. There's so much to that story. It's already connecting to Jesus. We get it. We get the whole idea of communion, right? But there's so much more to it. See, communion is meant to remind us of who the Son of God is. And so it's not a little thing that it's a cupbearer and a baker. In fact, it goes on that the cupbearer, he ends up being restored. And he becomes redemption for Joseph, to pull Joseph out of the punishment, the judgment that he's going through. Even though he's innocent, he saves him from it. The wine, the blood of Jesus is meant to cover us, to redeem us in our relationship with God, to bring us back into the house of God, to where we can have a relationship with God. It's the same thing for Joseph. But the baker has a dream, and Joseph interprets his dream and tells him, hey, listen, sorry to tell you this, but you're going to die. You're going to be hung on a tree, and your flesh is going to be eaten by the birds. There's a lot of imagery there, but let me make this really simple. The baker, the bread, Jesus, the bread of life, hung on a tree, and his flesh is eaten by the birds. In the culture, in the Jewish culture, birds represented unclean people, anyone who's not Jewish, Gentiles. Who are the ones who kill Jesus? Who are the ones that get to benefit from Jesus' death? Birds were considered unclean, and yet Jesus does this crazy thing in Matthew 13. He talks about a mustard seed being planted in the ground, and it becomes this tree. And he says that tree brings salvation to birds of all kinds. We are already seeing pictures of Jesus in the story of Joseph. Let me fast forward into the story. Joseph has moved his way up. He's now second in, he's the spot under Pharaoh. There's a couple dreams that the Pharaoh has, and Joseph interprets them and explains that there's going to be a big famine, and so they start storing up all the food. Little does Joseph know that his family is going to be affected by that famine, that they're going to be in a moment where they're going to need salvation, that they're going to need help. But he is providing all this. He's putting this all together. And then this great famine does take over the region, and the brothers convince Jacob, their father, for them to go to Egypt and see if they could get some food, any type of thing to keep them so that they can survive. They show up, and they don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. Can you imagine standing before this person that is in charge of your life, not knowing that that's the brother you sold into slavery? He's got their life in his hands, and they don't even know it. He begins trying to find out about their story, and they say, hey, we've got this younger brother also, Benjamin, and we've got other family. And he's like, wait, you have a younger brother? Why isn't he here? Joseph, he's trying to contain himself. But as he kind of hears, he goes, okay, so here's the deal. I'm going to incarcerate you for a little bit because I want to make sure you're telling the truth. And he sends him into prison for 3 days. That's weird, isn't it? 3 days. Something else happened for 3 days. And after 3 days, somebody else came out of something. Okay, so not only does he do that, but then he says, okay, I'm going to send you back. I'm going to give you grain. I'm going to send you back. Thank you for the money. Thank you for the silver that you've paid. I'm going to send you back to your father. But here's the deal. I'm going to keep one of you. I'm going to keep one of you here so that I am guaranteed that you'll come back. And you prove to me that you have a brother by the name of Benjamin, because I don't believe you. Joseph has no reason to believe his brothers. They're liars. And so he keeps the brother Simeon. That's no accident. Simeon is considered to be pretty much the most violent of all of the brothers. We see this in Genesis 34 and 49. For the Jewish mind, they would have seen Simeon as a representation of guilt and bloodshed and unrepentant sin. And Joseph keeps Simeon, sends the brothers back, right? He binds up Simeon and sends his brothers out. Just like Jesus when he is before the Roman guard and they're coming to arrest him, he allows them to bind him and says, just make sure my disciples are free to go. My brothers are free. The brothers take off. You start going down the road. Look what happens. Chapter 42. Jump down to verse 26. So they loaded the grain on their donkeys and left there. They've got to go back and tell Dad, hey, Simeon's back there. We got to bring our brother Benjamin to get Simeon out. At the place where verse 27, at the place where they lodged for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey and saw his silver there on top of the bag. This isn't good. This is not a good situation. The money that they had paid is now given back to them. So it looks like there's two problems here. First of all, the Pharaoh or whoever this person is going to think we stole the money back. But when we get back to Dad, he's going to go, where's Simeon? And we're going to go, well, we got the grain and we got money. So you sold your brother for this? You're supposed to just pay the money for it. They're in trouble. It's not a good moment. Once again, they have sold a brother into slavery. Well, they go through the food. We don't know how long, but they end up going through the food. Dad is not willing to let them go back. He's like, no, you're not. I'm not losing another one. You've already lost two. We're not losing another one. But now they've run out of food again. So finally, Judah, you know the one who betrayed? Judah steps up and says, Dad, if we don't come back with both brothers, Simeon and Benjamin, you can take my two sons and you can kill them. Okay, first of all, I'd hate to be Judah's son. That kind of is a bad spot. But isn't it interesting that the one, Judah, who betrayed the brother, Joseph, and sold him for silver, is willing to give his own life for his own son's life? And we fast forward to Judas, who sold Jesus into being crucified, decided that he would take his own life. So they go back. They get back to Egypt. Here's this guy again that they're supposed to talk to. They apologize for what's happened. They said, here's our brother Benjamin. We're proving to you that we are faithful, that we aren't lying. In fact, here's the money. We found it in our bags. We don't know how it got there, but here's everything. And Joseph says, hey, looks like you guys are telling the truth. That's great. Before I send you back, let's have a big feast. And so they have this big feast. Fast forward, jump down to chapter, let me look here real quick. Yeah, jump down to chapter 44. Again, we're going through his story pretty fast. We're going to get here towards the end here in a second. Joseph commanded his steward, fill the men's bags with as much food as they can carry. Here we go again. You'd think if I'm one of these guys, I would check my bag before I leave. Like something weird happened last time, right? They're dumb. Fill the men's bags with as much food as they can carry and put each one's silver on top of his bag. Oh, boy. Then, it gets worse. Put my cup, the silver one, that's kind of interesting, at the top of the youngest one's bag, along with the silver for his grain. And so he did as Joseph told him. Look at verse 3. At morning light, the men were sent off on their donkeys, and they had not gone very far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, pursue the men, and when you overtake them, say, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Isn't this the cup that my master drinks from for use and uses for divination? What you have done is wrong.'" Basically, he's going to catch him in the act. And the youngest son is going to have to pay the price. It's going to be death. When we see the word cup, we don't see it the same way a Jewish person would see it. We see this all over the Old Testament. Every time the word cup seems to show up, there's about 30 or so different moments where it talks about a significant cup that has some type of significance behind it. And a cup, in this sense, would be something that would be used by God to pour out his wrath and his judgment on something or someone that has done something wrong. And Joseph has given this cup. And they're standing before Joseph. And they're going to kill Benjamin. And Judah steps up again and says, "No, don't take his life. I give up my life for him." Joseph sees a change of heart in his brothers. See, up to this point, Joseph has been the bread of life. He's been the cup of salvation. But now there's a cup of judgment. And Joseph takes the cup back, kind of like Jesus takes the cup of God's wrath for us and takes on the punishment for us. And please, for Benjamin's life to be spared. Keep going to chapter 45. Look at this. Starting in verse 1. Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all of his attendants. So he called out, "Send everyone away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. Oh, can you imagine that moment? Crud. Verse 2. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it. That word wept is very interesting. It's the Hebrew word bakah. It basically is used in reference to an audible weeping so loud. It comes from a place of desperation to acknowledge a need for redemption. It's the kind of weeping that comes when a covenant has been restored, when long-awaited salvation has arrived. He is weeping out of joy and acknowledgement and grace and mercy and all the things that it's not that he's crying because of what they've done. He's crying because he now sees what God has done through all of this. Remember, Jesus was going to Jerusalem. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen as he looks at Jerusalem. And it says that he wept aloud. It's the same kind of word. It's the same meaning. The Bible tells us that when we are going through something so difficult that we just want redemption, that we just want salvation, that we just want to be freed from whatever we're going through, and we don't have the words for it, it says that the Holy Spirit weeps, groans with us and for us. How much, just thinking about that, do we see God's love that wants to wrap his arms around us? Look what happens. Verse 3, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Then Joseph, verse 4, said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me there, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Oh, man. It's such an amazing part of the story. He tells him, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. I've been through some stuff. But God, he is so gracious. Don't be angry. It's okay. Look what happens, verse 14. Then Joseph threw his arms around his brother Benjamin. Oh, man, that is the gospel. and wept. And Benjamin wept on his shoulder, and Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept, and afterwards his brothers talked with him. Can you imagine that relationship? Everything that Joseph said has come true. They have bowed before Joseph. They couldn't stop what God was already doing. And then Joseph looks at them and says, what you have done for me was for your benefit. What you meant for evil, God used for redemption. It's the same thing Jesus did for us. It's not just Joseph saying it, it's Jesus saying that for you and me. As we've been looking at this story, there are all these arc moments that we've gone back and forth. Here's Joseph, here's Jesus, here's Joseph, right? We can see it. But if I were to sum this up into one basic statement, it's this, is that what was done to Joseph, God did through Jesus. He did that for you and I. He turned his betrayal into our blessing, his suffering into our salvation, his death into our redemption. Joseph was by all means dead to his family. And yet God brought him back to life to be the salvation for his family. Exactly what God did with Jesus. So if we want to take jot some things down or kind of think of some things, how does this story apply? How does this gospel arc kind of apply to us? Let me give you 3 things. That God's mercy turns betrayal into blessing every time. That's what he does. The betrayal of Joseph's brothers by God's mercy became their undeserved blessing. It's interesting, when we try to think of the word mercy, we try to give it a description. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. It's standing before a judge, you are guilty. All the evidence is there, and the judge says, it's okay. You're forgiven because somebody else is going to pay the price for you. That's God's mercy. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. The cross was God's wrath poured out on Jesus instead of us for our mercy. Second, God's love turns God turns suffering into salvation. Joseph suffered for his innocence. And like Jesus, he suffered. His suffering brought salvation to his family and his brothers, and he weeps for the restoration of our relationship with God. Love doesn't always feel like love when we're suffering, but love always endures through the valleys of suffering. Isn't that cool? The third thing we can kind of take away is this, is that God's grace turns death into our redemption. Let me give you one of the wildest phrases in all of the Bible. By grace, you have been saved through faith. It's by grace that we did nothing for. We didn't even have a chance to earn grace. It was given to us before we even stepped foot on the scene. It's by grace that we're saved. By simple faith. That's amazing. All I've got to do is have faith. Faith is not just believing something really strongly. It's not just thinking something that might be true. Faith is belief in our hearts that turns into actions that point others to Jesus. Faith is an action. It's not a feeling or a thought. And just by faith, we are saved through God's grace. Grace is getting something we don't deserve before we even knew we needed it. And the cross was God's grace poured out on us through Jesus' death. Here's the reality. As we read the stories of the Old Testament, Jesus has always been plan A. From the moment that it said that God made anything, in the beginning, God. It's always been Jesus. It's always been about Jesus. Our redemption and our restoration from our sin has always been God's plan. Every story of the Old Testament is giving us glimpses of what Jesus was going to do. And it reveals the things in us that need to change, that Jesus came to change inside of us. That what we hear today, what we listen to today, should change us tomorrow and the next day. And that there should be a constant growth and change in us to the point where we are like Judah and we're standing before our brother and we say we are willing to die in his place. We are willing to let Jesus die in our place, and we're going to trust in that to save us. This is the gospel before Christ. And every time you read a story, every story that we look at in the Old Testament is pointing towards him. I don't think any of us, as we look back in our lives, are probably as terrible as Joseph's brothers. I hope you haven't sold any of your brothers into slavery. That'd be rough. You might get a little different knock at the door. But isn't it interesting that no matter how bad we've been, God's grace and his mercy and his love always show up, and it's always greater than anything we could ever do. Our God is like no other God. And we get to have a relationship with him because of Jesus.